A pleasant day to everyone. This is Shania Eyas from BSTCM 2K2, and today I'll be reporting Chapter 9 entitled The Philippines a Century Hence, or in Spanish, Filipinas dentro de 100 años. So if you have a book with you, turn your book to page 131. So now let's start. Jose Rizal's Filipinas dentro de 100 años, or translated as The Philippines Within 100 Years or The Philippines a Century Hence, was serialized on September 30, October 31, December 15, 1889, and February 15, 1890, in the 4th 90 Review, La Solidaridad of Madrid. So, in the articles, Rizal estimated the future of the Philippines in the span of 100 years and foretold the catastrophic end of Spanish rule in Asia. Forecasting the future of the Philippines within 100 years, the essay reflected Rizal's feeling that it was the time to remind Spain that the condition that ushered in the French Revolution could have a telling effect for her on the Philippine Islands. Collectively, the articles, in many senses, supplemented Rizal's great novel, Noli Me Tangere, and its sequel, El Filibusterismo. So, the essay also talked about the glorious past of the Philippines, recounted the deterioration of the economy, and exposed the causes of the natives suffering under the cruel Spanish rule. So in the essay, he cautioned Philippines as regard the imminent downfall and its domination. Part of the purpose in writing the essay was to awaken the minds of the heart and the hearts of the Filipinos concerning the oppression of the Spaniards and encouraging them to fight for the right. So basically, those what I've read are some of the point of view of Rizal in making this essay, which is the Philippines Century Hence. So now let's proceed to the cause of sufferings and deterioration. Causes and sufferings and deterioration. Our national hero, through the great efforts, proved and discussed the glorious past of the Philippines, the Philippine a century hence. He analyzed the deterioration of its economy and identified the causes of locals' sufferings under the cruel Spanish rule. So, the essay thus gave the following as the various causes of the sorrows suffered by the Philippine natives, as enumerated in the Philippines a century hence. So, first, Spain's implementation of its military policies. Because of such decrease, the Philippine population decreased intensely. Poverty became more widespread than ever as farmlands were left to the wither. The Philippines continued to suffer from hunger and disease. The family as a unit of society was deserted, and generally all facets of life of the natives becomes retarded. Second one, deterioration and disappearance of Filipino indigenous culture. The locals began forgetting that they were what their valued beliefs. Religions, songs, poetry, and other forms of their cultural heritage were. When Spain came with a sword and a cross, it started this slow but continuing damage of the native Philippine culture. Improvised and retarded, the people began losing their sense of self-worth and their confidence in their past and their heritage. So they became confused and hesitant in their current lifestyle and disgusted with themselves and ultimately lost hope in the future and the preservation of their race. Third one, passivity and submissiveness to the Spanish colonizers. They say attributed the passivity and submissiveness of our people to the manner of governance by the colonists. Spanish friars were one of the most powerful forces that influenced a culture of silence and lethargy among the locals. Through the use of force and intimidation, the natives learned to fanatically submit themselves to whims and caprices to strangers. One of the main topics tackled by Rizal in the essay was whether Spain could indeed prevent the looming and deterioration brought about the colonizers to Philippines. He was hopeful that the country's eventual improvement could not be hindered. For this, he made the following points. First one, keeping the people uneducated and ignorant failed. National consciousness had still awakened, and great Filipino minds still emerged from the rubble. Number two, keeping the people improvised also came to no avail. On the contrary, living a life and eternal destitution allowed the Filipinos to act the desired for a change in their way of life. They began to explore some other horizon through which they could move toward progress. Exterminating the people as an alternative to hindering progress did not work either. The Filipino race was able to survive amidst wars and famine and become even more numerous in such catastrophes. To wipe out the nation together would require the sacrifice of thousands of Spaniard soldiers, and this is something Spain would not allow. Rizal concluded that Spain had no means to stop the progress of the Philippines. What the colonists had to do was to change colonial policies to what would be suitable for the needs of the Philippine society and to the increasing nationalism of the Philippines. Now let's proceed to the Rizal's prophecies. Rizal expressed in the essay his confident prediction that something would awaken the hearts and open the minds of the Filipino people as regards to their plight. His prophecies the Philippines people's revolution against Spain, winning their independence, but later the Americans would come as the new colonizer. Eventually, the natives did recognize that harassment and cruelty in their society by foreign colonizers must no longer be tolerated. The native, thus lacking arms and enough training, voluntarily waged war against the colonizers. Even the not so predictable element of Rizal's prophecy became true. The American in 1898 wrestled with Spain to win the Philippines and due course took over the country. Relatively, theirs was a reign of liberty and democracy. Some years after Rizal's death, the Philippines attained the long-awarded liberalism and independence. Again, the period of the fulfillment of them he had written in the essay, History Does Not Correct So history does not record in the annals and any lasting domination by one people ever over another, of different races, of diverse tragedies, and customs of opposite and divergent ideas. One of the two had to yield and succumb to Jaguar's influence. Rizal's reference to America as probable factor in the Philippines future is said to be based upon the forecast of the German traveler Fyodor Jaguar. In 1960, Jaguar spent some months in the island and later published his observations, supplemented by 10 years of further study in European museums and libraries as travels in the Philippines. Rizal had read the Spanish version of Jaguar's book while a student at the Ateneo de Manila from a copy supplied by his brother Pasiano Jaguar's prophecy is said to furnish the explanation to Rizal's public life. His policy and preparing his countrymen for commercial and industrial competition seemed to have its inspiration in this reading done with his when he was a youth. So while in Berlin, Rizal met Professor Jaguar and so the renowned geographer and his youthful but bright admirer became fast friends, often discouraging on how the development of event was bringing through the fortune. For the Philippines, proper knowledge of the Philippines history and keen acquaintances with its situation and had enabled Jaguar and Rizal, both trained observers, to somewhat foretell the country's future. Next, the essay's relevance today. One way to properly interpret many Rizal's writing is to consider him the hymn he provided to his Noli Me Tangere, a quote, "I do not write for this generation. I am writing for other ages. If this could read me, they would burn my books. The work of my whole life." One, on the other hand, the generation which interprets these writings will be uneducated generations. They will understood they will understand me and say, not all were asleep in the night time of our grandparents. So indeed his essay, like the Philippine Century Hands, are the relevant today as they were when they were written. Rizal appeared to be counseling as the force and strengthening the most important backbone of our country, our values, outlooks, and the viewers that they have shaped our sense of national identity. So the essay, moreover, serves as to remind that we Filipinos are historically resolute and determined. In fact, all those efforts by the colonizers to keep us uneducated and improvised had failed. Nationalism eventually thrived, and the country became independent of her 4 centuries of tyrannical Spanish rule, and 5 decades under the Americans. So now let's proceed to the challenges of the Filipinos. So, however, there are questions that on whether we are really independent today. Are we really free when our economy are we really free when our economy is dominantly controlled by an elite oligarchy, and there are huge social and income disparities between a small favored economic and political elite and the rest of the Philippines population? In fact, Rizal himself also forwarded about this when he wrote in the El Filibusterismo, "Why independence if the slave today become the tyrants of tomorrow?" So moreover, there are some flaws in our character that can get into the way of attaining the what Rizal envisioned about our country. This includes attitudes like lack of appreciation of the significance of adhering to the rule of law, upholding high standards of excellence, advocating mediocrity as signposted by pwede na and bahala na attitudes is very unbecoming of what Rizal visualized in his essay. The challenges posed by the essay to the present Filipino families and especially to the government includes instilling national discipline and true love of country, exercising full control of our national sovereignty, assisting citizens connect with their communities, employing available communication means, the internet and their communication, employing available communication means the internet and the mobile technological to connect groups, to inform and educate, to enable Filipinos to discover the common ties we share. Meeting challenges of founding a more peaceful and stable social order, forming a common bond with our brothers and sisters in marginalized communities, and developing innovations that would improve dialogue and close gaps between our fellow citizens. The world outside improves dialogue and close gaps between our fellow citizens, the world outside, and preventing the spread of malicious and destructive propagandas. Ultimately, results the Philippines a century hence legacy to its timeless national message that established a fire, better society, with Paris reminding the Filipino people that our hope for survival relies on each of us taking responsibility. Now, let's proceed to other related writings of Jose Rizal. So, Jose Rizal composed several other brilliant writings which also helped to awaken the Filipino patriotism and pave the way of the Philippines Revolution. The following are hits to other timeless writings. So, these two writings are entitled Sobre la Indolencia de los Filipinos, or in English, the adolescence of the Filipinos, and the letter to the young women of Malolos. So, first, the Sobrila Indolencia de los Filipinos, or the adolescence of the Filipinos. This legal essay is a proof that national heroes historical scholarship. The essay rationally countered the accusations by Spaniards that Philippine natives were adolescent. So, what is adolescence? It means lazy. During the Philippines' reign, it was published in La Solidaridad in 5 consecutive issues on July, August, and September 1, 1890. In the article, Rizal argued that Filipinos were innately hardworking prior to the rule of the Spaniards. What brought decrease of the productive activities of the native was actually the Spanish colonization. Rizal explained the alleged Filipino adolescence by painting these factors. First, the galleon trade destroyed the previous links of the Philippines with other countries in Asia and the Middle East, thereby eradicating small local businesses and handicrafts industry. The Spanish forced labor compelled the Filipinos to work in shipyards, bridges, and some other public works, thus abandoning their agricultural farms and industries. Many Filipinos became landless and wanderers because Spain did not defend them against pirates and foreign invaders. The system of education offered by the colonizers was impractical, and it was mainly about repetitive prayers and had nothing to do with agricultural and industrial technology. The Spaniards were a bad example, as negligent officials would come in late and leave their offices early, and Spanish women were always followed by servants. Gambling like cockfights was established, promoted, and explicitly practiced by Spanish government officials and friars themselves, especially during feast days. The crack system of religious discouraged the natives from working hard by teaching them it was easier for a poor man to enter heaven, and the very high taxes were discouraging, as a big part of native earnings would not only go to the officials and friars were. Moreover, Rizal explained that Filipinos were just wise in their level of works under a tropical climate. He explained violent work is not a good thing in tropical countries, as it would be parallel to death, destruction, annihilation. Rizal thus concluded that the native supposed indulgence was an end product of the Spanish colonization. So now we're done to the first writing. Now let's proceed to the second writing, which entitled The Letter to Young Women of Malolos. So originally written in Tagalog, this famous letter, directly addressing to the women of Malolos, Bulacan, was written by Rizal as a response of Marcelo H. del Pilar's request. Rizal was greatly impressed by the bravery of 20 young women of Malolos, who planned to establish a school where they could learn Spanish despite the opposition of Felipe Garcia. He is parish priest of Malolos. The letter expressed Rizal's yearning that women be granted the name chances given the men in terms of education. In the older days, young women were not educated because of the principle they would soon to be wives and their primary career would be to take care of the home and children. Rizal, however, advocated women's right to education. So here are some of the points mentioned by Rizal in his letter to young women of Malolos. First, the priest is the country that time did not embody the true spirit of Christianity. Second, private judgment should be used. Third, mothers should be an epitome of an ideal woman who teaches her children to love God, country, and fellow men. Fourth, mothers should rear children in the service of the state of the standards of behavior for men around them. Fifth, Filipino women must be noble, decent, and dignified, that they should be submissive, tender, and loving to their respective husband. And young women must edify themselves, live the real Christian way with good morals and manners, and should be intelligent in the choices of life partner. So, as far as these are the points mentioned by Rizal in his letter. So, we're done to chapter 9, and that would be all